Well, it's funny you say, because I know both of you in your pockets have got a little MP3 device that also you use the podcast as well.
Exactly.
Yeah. What about you, John? What do you think the future holds for us?
I actually think the future will be probably very different from what we think it will be right now. But I think that podcasting will... I don't think the term or our expectations of it will necessarily follow the pattern that we think they will. So I think podcasting will become ubiquitous, but it won't necessarily be called podcasting. People will start to relate to audio in different ways. I think that over 5 or 10 years we'll start to create a culture of audio visual literacy, which mirrors or parallels the textual culture that we've had sort of for the last several hundred years with literacy. I think people will become visual as producers and consumers of media. They will, that children who are educated where podcasting is used as an educational tool. So for example, at PodCamp we had a guy called Joe Dale, who's a teacher on the Isle of Wight, who does stuff with language-based podcasting and gets all of his kids in those classes involved in that. But it also has the potential to create cultures within schools, to allow the schools to reflect their culture inwardly and outwardly, to showcase best practice, verbal literacy, all kinds of things there that I think have nothing to do with traditional radio formats. They have nothing to do with the way that we think about producing shows. They're merely about facilitating communication using speech and or video. And so I think that those things will gradually become part of the culture to such an extent that they actually change what we think the purpose of audio is. Whereas now we tend to think of radio, I don't think we'll think like that in 10 years. We will and also I think the convergence, mobile devices are just going to make it a hell of a lot easier to get this stuff, a hell of a lot easier to create it. So people will be, they will think differently about it. It won't be about how much equipment you have or anything else. It will just be, you have the capacity to do it. What are you going to do with it? What do you want to do with it? And who do you want to share it with?
And do you think also that socially, if you forgive the phrase, socially it'll be more acceptable as well? I mean, for us, I think that it's a large step to take to actually think, I might have something that other people might want to hear and all that. I think with the way that sort of social networking is working and the way people, and especially kids, are collaborating, that there's less of that social barrier.
Exactly. I mean, I think they just look at YouTube. I mean, the sort of stuff that people put up there, they don't think I'm making something really wacky. I mean, the guy that sang "Chocolate Rain." I mean, how many times have your kids heard that? Did he really think it was going to be a phenomenon when he stood there and sang that song? I don't think so. I think it was one of those things he just did, and it just happened. So we don't know what's going to be engaging. We might have some inkling of what we think is interesting, but somebody else might find it much more interesting. I listened to the BBC's Pods and Blogs the other day, and the one about this thing called ourstories.org, where people have gone out with MP3 recorders and recorded little stories. So there's a map. You click on the map and it shows you Zimbabwe, and you go click on there and there's a story of a couple of little guys, little children in Zimbabwe telling you their life. Are they podcasts? No. But what are they? They're just bits of audio, bits of video that you assimilate. And that's where I think it comes in.
Absolutely.
I think it's part. It'll be, I mean, in that sense, has the capacity to. People will start to leave audio-visual trails in the way that we have photographs and we had home movies and stuff like that. Now, because the devices are more sophisticated and it's a hell of a lot easier, you can store a lot more of it and carry it all around with you. It's becoming. People will leave those audio-visual records of their lives all over the place, and because of that, I think we will come to accept it and to understand it a lot more, because we're not, it used to be a top-down, broadcast out, you receive, and now you're broadcasting back. And that's coming in from all kinds of angles. So, you've just brought up YouTube, and I think that's a really good example of what podcasting is as well. They're the same thing to me. There's alternative media that's being created by the people who traditionally were the consumers. And I think, we are all those producers now, potentially, and it's just a matter of getting away from thinking about ourselves as trying to be Radio 2 or Radio 4 or anything else, and just thinking, how do we broadcast our own lives and make them interesting to the people around us that are interested in us?
So do we see a time when there are as many consumers as there are producers? In fact, all consumers are all producing as well.
Yes.
So almost as everyone's creating something and everyone's consuming something.
I don't see why not. I think that's a perfect example of what you'll get. I mean, the only thing that people will get upset about is whether they've got an audience. Do you shout into the void, and if nobody responds to you, do you know if you're being heard? Does it matter? I mean, as I said, with YouTube, when people put these things up on there, do they expect to be listened to? Sometimes they may. Sometimes they don't. It's as simple as that.
Depending on the kind of content you're creating, if just one person listens to it and one person likes it, then an audience of one for a lot of people is enough.
Absolutely.
Sometimes that's all you need. That is the audience to begin with. I mean, I've done podcasts which I've literally created it just for one person.
Yeah.
You know, and it is a podcast.
Yeah.
You know, I used all the same tools and I sent it in the same way, but it was only directed at that person.
Yeah.
You know, so I think people need to get away from being hung up about the whole notion of audience, because your audience are the people who are interested in you anyway.
Yeah.
And once you extend that and extend your interests, you know, like for example, you with your history podcast. You're extending out, suddenly you're reaching people who are sharing an interest that you have who otherwise you wouldn't meet.
But what's interesting,
so you're broadening your own base.
Because what's interesting is obviously being very new to this, you get a bit stats obsessed. You know, kind of like how many people have downloaded it, how many people are listening to it, and you kind of look at it, and the kind of stats I've got at the moment, which is like a couple of hundred, I guess, for podcasts, is that you can imagine that many people in a room. I can put my arms around an audience that size. But you with 10,000, with the double, you can't think. It begins to get. I can't imagine everyone's face there.
Starts getting a bit giddy, isn't it?
It begins to get a bit kind of scary.
That is a bit weird, actually. I must admit, I'm like John. I have people in mind when I'm doing the show, and I have people in mind when I'm recording it. But what I discovered something the other day was I was looking up on my website, who was linking to it, or who the tracebacks to that website, and I went to somebody else's website and I found a website where I'd never seen before. And somebody I didn't know before was responding to somebody else I didn't know, saying, "Listen to this podcast." So it was completely outside of me. Two people communicating about me that I wasn't involved in the conversation, and I thought that's weird. Yeah. That really was quite weird. Yeah. So you have no possibility of hugging them in the same way. It is a bit weird when you get to that level, but to be honest, I think it just goes up and down, and I just still say to people, it's like doing a presentation in front of 2,000 people. You only see the first row. After that, you're too scared. You know, you just carry on. If I thought about how many people listen, I would be terrified. I just do it.
And those people in the front row will be the people who will.
Hopefully, my friends.
And they'll respond, and they'll feedback and that kind of stuff. Whereas everyone else in the dark end of the theatre, you can't see won't.
No, I think it's best to think of your audience in terms of the people that you actually think you're addressing it to, and to address it to them, and anybody else that comes along is basically a bonus in that sense. I mean, sometimes it's about niche. I mean, that's cliche, but it is about niche.
Absolutely, and that also helps to keep the show tight as well, because you're focused on those people rather than thinking you've got to please the masses, and that's when you start losing, content and all that.